Hello everyone, hope you're all well and things are at least going okay for you, if not better to be fair. Now, you've probably seen the guys before. The current Friday features are basically our car history. So if you've seen the ones that come before this, great, hope you've enjoyed them. This one is my own car history, which does include a few different ones to be fair. Going back, 18 at the time, taking my driving lessons, one of the cars I really wanted to have was probably an Audi. But first cars, that's not going to happen. So the first car I wound up with, I was 19, and when it was bought, I was on holiday with my then girlfriend and her parents. My first car, when I got back, was a Ford Fiesta, a Mark I Ford Fiesta, and it's also the only car I can remember the registration of. NUA 281V. So I know that car's no longer on the road anyway. But it was my first car, my first taste of independence, and yeah, Mark I Ford Fiesta, 1.1 Poplar, literally the base range car of the time. It was good enough for me. Lasted quite a few years actually, had a few things go wrong with it, ended up with a replacement engine, had a replacement gearbox not long after that, but was a really good car to get me going with. So I had that for about 3 or 4 years actually. And yeah, when it came to replacing it, it really did need replacing. The guy who bought it actually used it as a banger racer after that. So it did continue a few years afterwards, but mainly on the racing circuit. But the car that replaced it was a Mini Metro. The original Austin Mini Metro, and it came from Driffield. I took it back there a couple of times. Now, in comparison to the Fiesta, the Metro was a luxury. It was more comfortable, it was more refined. I mean, it wasn't exactly a Rolls Royce, but the leap in quality between the Ford Fiesta of the time and the Metro was astounding. It was no wonder that in the UK the Metro became the best-selling car at that point, because it far exceeded anything that anybody else was producing. Even Austin at the time with the Mini, it was more refined, more comfortable. But unfortunately, that met with an untimely accident thanks to a Range Rover driving right in the middle of the road, forcing me onto a pavement, which ripped the back subframe off. So I needed another car, and thankfully I had one waiting in the wings. This one was my first Rover SD1. Now, the Rover and the Metro and the Fiesta were all blue. There's a bit of a theme there. But this was my first car. It was a 4-cylinder O series, so it was the Rover 2000. But still had the 5-speed gearbox, didn't have the electric windows, didn't have the velour interior, it was a cloth interior, and it was a 2-tone blue, which to be fair was a bit weird. It was a mid blue at the top and a light blue at the bottom. It didn't really look that good, to be honest, but it was a good car. I bought it myself, got it on the road myself, maintained it as well, loved it. And even from the Metro, it was a step up again in terms of comfort, refinement, and power steering was fantastic. Aided with parking and things like that immensely. And the thing was as well, it was rear-wheel drive. But thankfully this one had alloys on from a Vitesse, so the alloys were massively heavier than the steel wheels, and it actually helped with grip as well. But eventually that car had to go, and I bought myself the car I always wanted. So my next car was the Audi GT Coupe. from 4 cylinders to 5. And 2.2, 5-cylinder petrol engine. Absolutely mad car. You could be tootling along on the motorway at around 70, and if somebody came up behind you with their lights flashing away, you didn't have to change down a gear. You just stuck your foot on the floor, you were pinned back in the seat, and off you went. That idiot was left in the dust. Of course, not so easy, not condoning that sort of behaviour, but the thing was, the power was right there where you needed it, whatever gear you were in. Brilliantly comfortable. Can't really fault the car at all. Again, absolutely loved it. It was literally the rally car for the road, and you understood fully why Audi were beating everybody in the rallying stakes with that car at the time. While everybody else was tootling around with rear-wheel drive, some cars experimenting with front-wheel drive, the four-wheel drive Quattro, just amazing. And the GT was literally that sort of car. It was amazing. And the build quality as well. Fantastic. And the thing was, it was at that time where you couldn't give them away. I got mine for 500 quid. Mind you, the insurance was considerably more, especially as I was only, 24 at the time, if that. So, yeah, that car ended up being got rid of because it was just becoming far too expensive to run. The fuel costs, the insurance costs, had to get something a bit better. But here's the irony. I didn't get a smaller car. I ended up with a bigger one. The car that replaced it was my second Rover SD1, and going up from 5 to 6 cylinders, I had the 2.6 straight 6 SD1. Now, this one was a lot more comfortable than the one I had before. It had the dark blue velour interior. It had electric windows all round, had sunroof, it had all sorts of things. All factory fitted as standard. And yeah, there were a couple of repairs I had to do on the car. There were a couple of things I had to change and alter. And the thing was, yes, while you're tootling around town, you could watch the fuel gauge move. But stick it on a motorway, drive it in fifth, you could tootle from one end of the M62 to the other, and you wouldn't notice the fuel had actually moved until you got to the end of the journey. The consumption was amazing on those cars. They were literally built for cruising in fifth gear. If you could get it into the higher gears, the fuel consumption was practically non-existent. Obviously it was consuming fuel, but the thing was, you could do a lot more mileage. And I used to use that actually for work as well. When I first started in I consider my first proper job, working in IT, basically IT repairs and things like that. So I'd be driving this thing from Huddersfield to Scarborough, and I'd use less fuel than I would pottering around town during the week. It was freaky, but it actually made me quite a bit of money in terms of the fuel costs and the amount of money I could actually reclaim in fuel. So it was a brilliant car for that. And I had that for quite a few years. I had that until about 2001, 2002. And it becomes surplus to requirements. It wasn't being used so much. So I had it on the drive in the house that we just bought and had the driveway converted for. And it was in a bit of a sorry state. So I let it go. And it was one of those things that I regretted it at the time and still regret now. That it wasn't being used. I was using company cars at the time, which everything was paid for with a fuel card. So it didn't make sense for me to have a car that cost me money when I had a company car that didn't. So I went a couple of years and I didn't have a car of my own. And then in 2005, there was a massive round of redundancies. Around 10% of the workforce was going. So there's all these big consultations going on and things like that. I realised this. In a couple of months, I might be out of a job. If I was out of a job, I didn't have a car. So I went and looked for one. And the car I got was a 2-litre Renault Laguna. And this one, I can't remember the model spec itself, but it had had all the ABS, things like that, but it also had the talking computer as well. And I had that car for quite some time. It was about 2008 when the financial crisis hit that I finally got rid of the car because it was getting ridiculously expensive to run. It was about 30 quid a week, and all I was doing was pottering to and from work, which was 5 miles, 10-mile round trip. That's what I'd be doing every day, and it was costing me an absolute fortune. So, with a heavy heart, I advertised the car. Somebody bought it. I replaced it with a Rover 414. I bitterly regret that for 2 reasons. One, had I held out another couple of weeks, the oil price fell through the floor and the petrol prices plummeted. So it would become cheaper for me to run again. But also, the Rover 414 that I picked up was an absolute dog. I mean, I wanted a car that I had to do some work on, but when I actually went to pick the car up, no, it really was a huge mistake. But there wasn't anything I could do at the time. I effectively bought and paid for the car before seeing it. I was stuck. So I ended up with this car, sold the Laguna, but didn't keep the 414 for long. That was got rid of very quickly and was replaced with my first Citroen. Now, the Citroen Xantia I absolutely loved. It had all hydroelastic suspension. It had this lever in the centre console that you pulled up, moved forward if you wanted the suspension to go. Where did it go? I think that went down. Then you pulled it back and there were 2 positions to go back to, which to raise the suspension. But basically the suspension could be raised and lowered. Fantastic in the snow. Really, really good. Because if you had wound up in a bit of a drift and your car was being bogged down, you raise the suspension, you could go over the drift. Brilliant. And I had that car a while actually. 1.8 petrol, I believe. And yeah, absolutely flawless. I mean, it was also the first car, because my wife, she suffers from travel sickness, and it was the first car we actually had where we could travel from where we live to the west coast, so Lytham St Anne's sort of way, without her getting travel sick. The first car ever that she'd actually be able to do that with. So, we drove around in it. It was really, really good for the sort of things we were doing, and we had that car for quite a while. It developed a problem with the injection system, so sold that car on and replaced it with a Citroen C5. And this was the first generation C5, first model year as well, of 2001. But this thing had literally every option you could think of, including the full colour sat-nav, which I think was a £1,500 option at the time. But this was one of Citroen's demo or press cars, and they actually had the official Citroen mark in the windscreen for that. But again, this was a 2-litre diesel, trip computer, all the works. Sat-nav built in, brilliant little car. Well, I say little, it was huge, massive. At the time we still lived up at in this particular place where we were actually at the top of a hill. went through quite a narrow track to get to where you could park the car, private car park. And whereas the Xantia had quite a lot of space out either side, as did the Laguna, the Citroen had a couple of inches either side. And if you weren't careful, you could scratch the car and dent it quite heavily. Luckily, I didn't actually have that happen. But I could only get the car from the car park from coming up the hill and turning across the road. If I was coming down the hill, I didn't have enough room to turn into the drive. So it made plotting your route home interesting. But brilliant car. Again, the suspension. Instead of a lever this time, there were a couple of buttons. So you'd push the up button to raise the suspension, push the down button to lower the suspension. You'd see the display showing the car. And all the toys you could imagine. Absolutely brilliant. The first time I'd ever had climate control with separate zones in my own car. I've had it in company cars, but my own car, it was the first one I'd actually had it in. And fantastic vehicle. That I had for quite a long time. So I had it when we moved house. While I had that, I got my first MG, which was an MGF. And what had happened was I got made redundant. I saw it in a car sales place not far from where we lived, and basically said, if that car's still there when I get another job, it's mine. And it was, and I bought it. So, little two-seater, yes, there's 3 of us in the house, because we had our daughter. It's my daughter from a previous marriage as well, so it's not exactly the practical side of things we bought it for. It was the fun side of things. And it was great. Black and red leather inside. Was the car itself was silver, but it met a very quick end. Not because of head gasket failure or anything like that. I was basically driving it. I was popping into work, and stopped at a roundabout, and unfortunately the car behind me didn't. It shoved me forward, and basically, yes, the car appeared okay. I had it picked up, so I drove it back and drove it home. I had it picked up by the guys who bought the car from, and they stored it for me while the insurance assessor came out to look at it. But also I went out to have a look. I had to get some stuff out of the car at the time, and I thought while I was there, I'll just check the roof catchers. Now, when I adjusted them, they were tight, so there's no gap in the roof or anything. But I realised the one on the passenger side was incredibly loose. You could actually move the roof. And it was then I realised that the shell had been pretty seriously shunted and buckled, so there was no way the car could be rescued. But luckily there was a MG TF at another car place just up the road, and I had the money in the bank, and I thought, well, instead of waiting for the payout, I'll go buy that car. So I did, and I had my green MG TF, which again I had for quite some time. Now, the Citroen, going back to that, we'd moved house into the one we are in now, and I'd just done the sensible thing of quitting my job. So, you know how it is. You get your mortgage, you're about to do your first mortgage payments, you moved in, and you quit your job. And I went on to contract. I actually didn't. I basically didn't do anything for a while apart from study and do my teaching qualification. So I got that mostly out of the way and thought to myself, I fancy another car. I had the hankering for an MG ZR. And I found one with LPG conversion. And thought, okay, I'll get that. Bought it and put the Citroen up for sale. I do regret selling the Citroen. I really do miss that car. But the ZR was LPG conversion, factory fitted, which came in handy when I was contracting, and I was contracted to Network Rail, so I was all over the country providing training. And the MG-ZR was great. Fill it up with petrol on the Sunday, top up the LPG, basically drive to where I was going on the petrol, because that's the one I could claim back. All the stuff I was doing in and out, I would do on LPG, and I'd use LPG on the way back just to empty the tank and then transfer over to petrol. And of course, the mileage I could claim back, I was doing great. It did me a really good service, did that, and did so up until 2016, when it was sabotaged, and unfortunately met a rather unfortunate end. I have a suspicion on who did it. One of the learners that I had at the time was a bit of a disruptive so-and-so, and was sacked, and basically threatened some sort of revenge. And it was well known within the class that which one was my car, what sort of things I liked. So there was a suspicion at the time that it could have been him. But, can't say for certain. It was only ever a suspicion, and really, in the end, it doesn't really matter. Because I was on the way, when the car finally failed, to view the car I have now, which is my Rover 75. And yes, you might say, isn't that a bad idea? K-series engines, blah, 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 blah. But this one is the Rover 75 diesel. And that's the BMW M47 engine. Slightly modified with the rail, the fuel rail, rather than the old system of delivery, which is why it's the M47R. The R doesn't stand for Rover, it stands for fuel rail, the rail for fuel. And I have to say, I've still got the car. It's still running, and I've had it now for 4 years. And unless something catastrophic happens, I don't see any reason to get rid of it. It's brilliantly reliable. I've probably cursed it now. It's actually quite cheap to run, even though it's a 2-litre diesel. And the M47 engine was probably one of the cleaner diesels of the time as well. Arguably cleaner than some of today's engines if you took the technology around them that makes them legal away from those engines. They're arguably cleaner than what those would be without those technologies. So, really good solid engine. And a pretty good solid car as well. Comfortable. Harks back to the SD1 in many ways in terms of the refinement, the solidness of the car as well. And it's been the mainstay of the whole production for Overdrive. You can frequently see it in shots where it's caught in on camera, parked up somewhere while we've been shooting in and around it. It's literally the mainstay of the entire crew, really. And was even pitted against a Mark II Mondeo which would have been around at the same time, and came off the better car in some respects. There's some areas where the Mondeo was better, the steering's probably a bit better, but then again the ZT has a more refined steering as well, as does the facelift as well. So if you're wanting a more snappy steering rather than a more luxury laid back steering, either get the ZT or the facelift 75, which at that point they all had the same power steering system. But that's it. That is my car history. I don't have the TF anymore, which again I'm pretty upset about, but I had to sell it because I basically needed the money at the time. But again, bitterly regret that one. But that's it. That is my car history. Not quite as varied as many cars as the other guys, but certainly a lot more varied at times. In the Audi, the SD1s, the 75, the C5, quite a lot of choice and variation there. But that's it for now. So that's my part of the Friday features done. Hopefully things will be getting back to normal soon. With any luck, we're going to start getting back to more of a normality. And with any luck as well, you'll all still be here and we'll all be safe as well. So, for the moment, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.